everybody, and welcome back. Do keep in mind that what I'm showing you right now is still work in progress, so things can change. What of course I'm talking about today is USN armor-piercing bombs for USN CVs. And this stuff is actually like really exciting. Okay, maybe not exciting, maybe that's not the best word, but it's really interesting. Okay, do keep in mind that when you see things, in this video and the damage numbers, don't freak out because, again, this is in non-battle conditions against stationary targets where I'm going to land like the majority of my hits. I think in actual battle conditions, maybe things aren't going to work as well, although perfect drops are going to be able to hurt ships. But why am I excited? Well, I'm not excited necessarily for the Enterprise. It's good that she's finally getting something like this because it actually sets her up to be quite an interesting carrier. She's now able to do some pretty serious damage. But what actually has me really excited is the fact that something in the game that maybe hasn't mattered for quite a while, in terms of sort of, let's say, deck armor design and stuff like that, I think is actually going to be relevant. So you'll notice that I hit the Fuso there, 10 hits for like 30k damage. And I'm going to test this out a few times. I'm going to hit a couple of Fusos. And you'll notice that with the Fuso, I'm going to hit them really hard. I think one of them might even just outright kill them in one wave. Where I actually only get like 7 bomb hits, but I'm pretty sure I landed a whole bunch of Citadels. That's why the battleship instantaneously melts. However, you'll notice that when I attack other battleships, that's not going to happen. And the reason why I think this is, not happening is because certain other battleships have better designed deck armor against air attacks. So, for example, at tier 10, for example, the Kurfürst versus the Montana. Montana doesn't have as much deck armor per se, but I found that when I was bombing Montanas, I did, generally speaking, less damage with the bombers because the Montana's armor, at least I think historically, was better designed to deal with air attacks compared to, whatever the fictional Kurfürst would be. But, the German battleships, maybe that wasn't stressed as much. So that is interesting. I think deck armor is going to become quite an interesting balancing factor in the future. Not only do you now maybe have advantages against shells, but you also might have advantages against dive bombers that are packing armor-piercing bombs. So far, what we know is that the Enterprise has these 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs. There's also another one that's apparently been brought into the game, something that's even bigger, and I'm guessing that might be for Midway, Essex, maybe. But those ones I think are, those are going to be scary for tier 10s. But anyways, take a look. I bombed that Fuso initially, 30k damage. That was quite good, although I only managed 10 hits out of 12, and 30k damage. I'm pretty sure there's got to be at least one Citadel there or something like that. But anyways, I'm going to go bomb this Fuso. And you'll notice that, first of all, the drop pattern is like an elongated pattern. Armor-piercing bombers are specifically going to go and mess battleships up. See? 7 hits and dead Fuso. I mean, I hit that Citadel a good number of times. And it's mostly because these particular armor-piercing bombs are very good at penetrating armor. And if you get enough penetration, the deck armor maybe isn't that great. You get Citadels and you actually do just tons and tons and tons of damage. But you probably also noticed that that particular drop pattern probably isn't going to be also good against smaller ships. So these dive bombers are really going to be targeting battleships. So battleships which, have been for a very long period of time just been able to, sit bow in and ignore stuff, I think are going to have a new threat in the form of these armor-piercing bombers, which also could mean that USN CVs could now become a very interesting pick. They're not going to be as strong as the IJN in certain aspects, namely just the mass of torpedoes, but with bombs that can just really output damage if you hit somebody correctly. Now, of course, this is going to force battleships to definitely go and hug cruisers a little bit more. Again, do keep in mind that if I'm dealing with tier 10A as Enterprise, these planes are still going to suffer, right? They're still tier 7 planes, but if you catch things in isolation, especially later on in the game when A isn't so strong, these bombers are going to hurt. That, now combined with Enterprise's torpedo armament, ooh, this is going to make Enterprise a very, very interesting ship. But anyways, okay. So just in that regard, armor piercing is, for the ship in itself, interesting. But for the game, I think this is going to be a lot more. There's a lot more to it than what we see on the surface right now in terms of, yes, me doing like that, boatloads of damage. I think what this is going to do is it's really going to start to force CV players in the future to really start to remember, the armor layouts of ships and what ships are going to be vulnerable. Because not every ship is going to be vulnerable in the same kind of way. You'll notice that the Fuso seems notoriously vulnerable here. Like, I'm just hitting that Fuso and just doing tons of damage. But then you'll see me strike something like a New Mexico or Bayern. And you'll notice that the damage, well, it's not as high. And this has a lot to do, I think, with the way that the armor is structured in the ship. Like, for example, the Bayern has, if I remember correctly, there's the upper piece, the upper deck armor, then there's like a main deck armor, and then there's another layer beneath it. So it's got like 3 different layers. And the Bayern just doesn't take all that much damage from these armor-piercing bombs. Now, I'm not sure what the mechanics are exactly for these bombs yet, and that'll be something that I'm going to have to spend a lot more time figuring out and testing. In theory, they should be identical to normal sort of shells, because these things do have a caliber. These 1,000-pounders, I think, are like 305 millimeters caliber, so equivalent to that in battleship shells. But there's something about them that I think I've got to look into a little bit more detail to figure out exactly how they penetrate and do damage. So anyways, going back to what I was talking about earlier, the thing that I think is going to be really interesting is, one, the USN is, like I said earlier, going to become kind of unique. They're going to have their own thing going for them that's going to be very different from the Japanese. And 2, it's really going to change the way certain ships get played or certain ships get balanced. I mean, you might have ships like the Kurfürst, which I would say right now is one of probably the best tier 10 battleships. And most people are probably going to be like, yes, Kurfürst is amazing, and Montana maybe not so much. But that's, true in the current situation. What about in a situation where this comes into play, where all of a sudden now, with that deck protection, because the Montana's deck protection is the same sort of multi-level or multi-layered protection, and the Montana doesn't take as much. And I'll show you a little bit of the clip sort of later on, where you get to compare sort of the Kurfürst damage and Montana damage, and it's very, very interesting. It might provide some more balancing variables for ships that currently in the game maybe are just deemed really, really strong in almost all situations. All of a sudden they're going to be like, oh wait, hold on, now they're vulnerable to a new weapon system that wasn't here before, and whether or not something is strong, well, that can be debated again, right, based on these new things. Alright, so hold on a second. You've seen me hit the New Mexico once, and you'll notice that that one strike on the New Mexico, the damage wasn't nearly as severe as against a Fuso. Also, the length of a ship now is going to be a bigger factor. In the past, the length of a ship mostly had to do with, well, the ship is long, so turning circle radius may be a little bit bigger. But now it's a little bit different too. The shorter your ship, the more compact it is, well, the less likely you are going to be vulnerable to these armor-piercing dive bombers. So comparatively speaking, for example, a ship like the Alabama versus the North Carolina now has another advantage for the Alabama. It's a smaller ship, so even if a CV gets a perfect drop, it's going to hit less bombs overall, because there's going to be at the ends parts of your ship that are not going to be inside that drop circle, so you're going to be able to dodge a bit more. See, another attack on that New Mexico. And again, the damage just wasn't at the same level as I had damage on the Fuso. I'm going to skip forward a little bit more, and you'll see me get an attack on the Bayern, and you'll see just how well protected the Bayern is. And here we go. I'm setting up for this attack, and I'm going to hit this Bayern. And just pay attention to the damage. It's going to be really interesting. The USNCVs after this change also are not really going to have that damage over time. So now they're going to be significantly more massive alpha strike versus maybe the IJN. That's more going to be some like damage over time kind of thing. See it? There we go. 9 hits. And the Bayern only took like 10k damage. And that's it. That's the craziness in terms of deck armor differences. The Fuso just takes huge amounts of damage, and the Bayern kind of can shrug it off, and it won't be as badly affected. Taking the same bombers into tier 10, and well, the results are really, really cool too. Attacks on curve first, for example, one, you do tend to land a lot of hits because it's the size of an island, but second, you do also tend to do potentially a lot of damage. The curve first armor, while it's not bad, it's not the best deck armor protection scheme in the game right now. I would say that Yamato, in terms of pure thickness, is better, and Montana, for having simply more layers of armor, does, I think, quite a bit better as well. So you'll notice that here I've done like 4 different attacks on the curve first, and the damage numbers can range anywhere from like 21,000 roughly, all the way up to about 40 plus thousand. So there we go. This one was closer to about 30,000. And this one here I think will be closer to about almost 40k. I think this one was almost about 40,000 damage. Let's see here. Yep, on 11 hits, 38,385. I think had I landed all 12, that one would have been over 40k as well. Now, compare it to the Montana, and, well, the story is a little bit different, although with the Montana, sometimes I don't hit as many. So, first of all, this one was 9 bombs, so this wasn't the best example, but 15,000 damage wasn't as high. Take a look at the next attack here. Again, attacking, no, not the curve first here, attacking the Montana. There we go, good bombers. Here we go, going in, and this one I think I do hit a bit more there. 10, 7,400 damage. Different attack going in against another Montana here, and typically with the Montana, I think the peak damage I've gotten so far out of the Montana usually somewhere around 20 something thousand, I think, is where I top out. That last one was all 12 bombs. I don't think I only did like 16,000 damage maybe. Against Yamato, story is similar. Yamato, in terms of raw thickness, does really, really well. You still do get a good amount of penetration damage, I would say. But generally speaking, I find the Yamato to be, out of the tier 10s, I would say in between the curve first and the Montana. Montana, I think, right now, against air attacks, pretty well protected. Although there I see against that Yamato not that much damage either. Followed by the Yamato sort of in the middle, and the curve first way off board, being the worst one in the game right now in terms of deck protection. So there you are. Armor-piercing bombs. This is really exciting because I think if armor-piercing bombs make it into the game and they're like a specialty USN thing, first of all, I think carriers, there's going to be some sort of interesting balance there between IJ and the USN, just because they now have completely different things going for them. The Enterprise, for example, a ship that, I wasn't a huge fan of in the last iteration, now I can see being a little bit more interesting. I mean, especially if she holds those strikes back just a little bit, a little bit sort of mid-game-ish, where AA starts to get worn down, the combination of her dive bombers, which can strike and do damage, plus her torpedoes, even though the torpedoes aren't very good, and even though you're only going to be able to hit a couple of them, that combined amount of damage, I think, is going to be quite scary. I think this also brings about, again, like I said, a whole new sort of ways of seeing battleships in the game. There's going to be battleships that now you look at far more than how much bow armor do they have, how much belt armor do they have. Now you got to really look at how much deck armor do they have. Are they going to be able to, and the layout of that deck armor. Is it going to be effective against these new dive bombers? A whole new set of balancing variables now for battleships in the future. So this is really cool. And also I think this is going to force some changes to the gameplay as well. If you're into something like a Fuso, in the past, it didn't really matter. You played it like a battleship. You didn't really worry too much about air. I mean, sure, or you'd be as worried about air as any other battleship at tier 6, for example. Now, if the AP bombs make it in, you're going to be a lot more worried. You're going to be like, oh dear, if there's a USNCV on the other end, now I've really got to go hug an AA ship. Because if I get caught out by myself, that combined strike from the dive bombers plus the torpedo bombers and my not so great deck armor means you might just get nuked in one go. And I think this will bring about some gameplay changes as well, and probably for the better as well. Battleships also probably, if this change goes through, are not going to be sitting bow on as much because, hey, while you might be immune to that battleship over there, you're not going to be immune from those things coming down from the sky, and those things will hurt, just like, the battleships will. Because if you get a good salvo in there, I mean, that's the equivalent of, what, 1-2 Citadel hits? Hell, if you manage to get through the armor and actually hit the Citadel, you could wipe out a substantial chunk of HP in one go. So, interesting stuff, right? And now that you've seen a little bit of this, are you excited? Are you, thinking about the possibilities now, which is what I was doing, after I started testing this stuff. I'm like, "Oh, wow, this is going to make certain things really relevant." Things that currently in the game it's like maybe nobody cares about. I mean, right now, honestly, deck armor wise, in most cases all you care about is okay, is my deck armor enough to resist HE? Do I get to auto bounce shells that come in, at this distance? Yes, yes, okay, perfect. And you don't care about that anymore. With this change, oh, depending on the layout and the layers and all that stuff, it's gonna be relevant again. So are you excited? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Anyways, let me do this one last strike here on this curve first, because I love picking on curve first. They're these huge targets that I think these dive bombers are just gonna feast on in the future. Anyways, let me know what you all think. Aside from that, folks, take care, have yourselves a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.